Hey, I'm Greg Crawford, and I am very honored to once again be sitting and speaking with Arielle Guttman. We previously did an extended discussion about the meaning of Venus retrograde cycles in general, and specifically about the Venus retrograde period in Aries and Pisces that occurred during March and April, but it also really extends back into January when you look at the whole entire cycle. So I'm going to link that YouTube video down in the comments. I really recommend watching that one to get a feel for the meaning of Venus retrograde and this current cycle before watching this one if you're unfamiliar with it. But what we're gonna do in this video, because so much happened, we knew that this was going to be a Venus retrograde period for the ages due to numerous factors, including the fact that it was combining with eclipses, stationing on degrees of eclipses. There was a Mercury retrograde. We had Neptune changing signs at the same time, at the same place Venus was. So, just so much to talk about. So we thought it would be great to come back and talk about it again, talk about some of the events that happened in the news, and show how that lines up with the Venus retrograde cycle. So thank you for being here with me again, Ariel.
Oh, thank you. We had such a great conversation last time, and we went a while, and we kind of ran out of time. You and I both had slides we still wanted to show, but it was already getting late, and we thought, let's just do another part after the retrogrades and look back on it and see what did transpire. And a lot of the things we talked about, amazingly, have come up. And so we'll talk about some of that now. That's great. I'm really happy to be in conversation with you because I think we're on the same page on a lot of our ideas and um, thoughts about what's been happening and interpretations too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, what stood out for you about this Venus retrograde with what you've seen and just how you've tracked this across time and then actually witnessing what was actually happening this time around?
Well, the main point was that it was in early Aries and the Venus retrograde, well, the star point was in early Aries, but the Venus retrograde was going to pass over the world point of zero Aries three times.
Hmm.
And that Mercury was also going to be retrograde right around the same degrees and right around the same time frame as the Venus retrograde, and was also going to pass over the world point three times, going from Pisces to Aries. And I have a slide on that. If people don't know the world point, we'll talk about it a little bit more. But my main thing was, what is the conventional wisdom in astrology about not doing things or making decisions during Mercury retrograde, or big decisions, or even Venus retrograde? Can there be uh, things that we set into motion that suddenly reverse? Because we know that when the planets are retrograde, especially Mercury and Venus, the two interior planets that closer to the Earth, that when they're retrograde, they're closest to the Earth for one, and it really involves things that happen on the Earth in a bigger picture kind of way. So, of course, it all depends on how it's hitting your own chart. It's not like everybody in the world is going to come to a screeching halt while Mercury's retrograde or Venus is, but certain things will in people's charts or in the world at large, especially again going over that world point. But I have a couple of slides that are going to show how many uh, laws were enacted or decisions were made or things that were said that were going to happen, and then they reversed course. It's like there's so many, I couldn't even keep up with them. I kept watching this going, if only they had astrologers. Not that they would listen, but necessarily, but this has always been said about politicians. If only they had an astrologer. Um, some politicians have had astrologers and they have listened, like Reagan, for instance. But it's it just reminded me again of the accuracy and that the idea in astrology that there is something to these retrogrades, and it's
Mm,
worth thinking twice before you issue forth an edict that is then going to, go the other way, not go the way you intended it to go.
mm. And absolutely, yes, absolutely. And one thing about all these things combining eclipses, Venus retrograde, Mercury retrograde, Neptune changing signs at the same time.
Yeah.
But especially the eclipses are going to always bring big shifts, endings, beginnings, major changes, and Venus Mercury also always bring big changes, and also often bring sometimes something countercultural, but usually something going against the way things currently are and just consensus agreements and reality and that type of picture. And one of the things that we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but that intensifies this even more is the fact that Saturn and Neptune are ending a cycle simultaneously. And Mercury and Venus retrograde periods were weaving back and forth between Saturn and Neptune, crossing over Neptune multiple times. Venus stationing with Saturn, Mercury stationing very close to Saturn, and then both of them moving forward back across Neptune. So it was also linked with a Saturn Neptune cycle, which is also going to be all about changes in collective reality, consensus agreements, geopolitical alignments, all sorts of and massive personal changes happening too. I know one of the things that you had talked to me about before this, you wanted to focus on was severed relationships, and there we saw a lot of that, which we can think about in part with it being Venus and Aries, Venus retrograde in a Mars sign, and that being this particular Venus star point, and then Venus going back into Pisces, which is her exaltation, but she's with Saturn for an extended period of time, which can also, in some cases, end or break up things. Although in other ways, bring in some maybe long range things ending and beginning, and yeah, big changes happening in general. So, yeah, what made you think about that in terms of what you've seen normally with Venus retrograde and Aries star point periods and how that went this time around?
Yeah, well, I've always called the Aries star point the activist, and
Hmm.
because of it being Venus and the Venus star, it's like passionate activism. It's like we're going to talk about John Lewis later. We're going to make some good trouble in Aries. It's like we're going to make some noise, and
Hmm.
it's going to be for a good reason.
Hmm.
But I think that what really struck me was, and of course, I did the chart for the actual star point over Washington to see how it was falling, because you can do the star point for any location in the world to see, like your own country, your own city, uh, to see how it's affecting that particular area for really the next 9 months, because the or you could take it for the next 1.6 years, because it's really the beginning of the 584-day synodic cycle of Venus when she's at that star point. She's at that Kazemi point with the sun. It's like the seed moment that's planting this whole next 584 days. So you could look at it as effective for that particular time. Uh, I think also it made me realize that, in astrology, so many people have said over the years that when Venus is retrograde, there's this idea that old relationships can come back into your life. What I and I haven't really. experienced that so much myself, but I thought, okay, maybe that's true. But what I really saw in this Venus retrograde cycle was that old relationships weren't necessarily coming back. Relationships were just falling apart, like flat on their, they were just drowning. They were severing. And it could have been because it was in Aries, like you said, it's Mars's sign. Although in mythology, if you recall, Venus was the only one that could soothe Mars and temper Mars and calm him down and not make him so hot-headed, but really kind of, they had a pretty good relationship with one another. They had a very arousing, sensual relationship with one another. And there's this famous painting, and I don't know who I want to say it's by Botticelli. It looks like the style of Botticelli, that where Mars is kind of reclining on a
Mm.
couch,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like wiped out, and Venus is still there, kind of, all perked up and everything. But it was showing how her energy, the Venus energy on Mars can kind of deflate him a little bit, or, make him really um, almost like a sleepy, dreamy, passed out state. Of course, Mars was retrograde in Cancer during a lot of this time. So Mars was in a position that isn't really the strongest for Mars. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so we have to wait until the rest of that cycle kind of, which I think we're just at the end of that now, the end of that Mars cycle. The other
Mm-hmm.
really incredible thing that I don't remember this happening for a long time, if ever, in astrology was that if we go back to last fall, we had Mars enter, well, in the fall, we had the last Mercury retrograde cycle. And then right after that, Mars went into retrograde for a longer period of time. And then Venus went into retrograde. And then Mercury went into retrograde. And some of those other retrogrades stopped. But there was like this overlap. If you consider their longer phases, including the shadow periods, we were we've been in a long shadow almost since election day, which is
Mm.
kind of telling, isn't
Yeah,
it?
absolutely. I think the thing in addition to that that makes it so unusual, and I don't know when this has happened before, actually, that not only that was happening, but then you also are adding in eclipses and Venus and Mercury both stationing retrograde near, these solar eclipse degrees, and then Venus and Mercury stationing direct near these lunar eclipse degrees.
Yeah.
The ones happening in the same time period as well as the ones from like 6 months ago. So that's just so powerful. With at the same time as I kept mentioning, Saturn and Neptune coming to the end of their cycle, the North Node being there, Neptune entering Aries, being on the world point, like we'll talk about, and I'm just going back and forth over it. It's
Yeah,
really
you
remarkable.
know, it is. With a solar eclipse, you can't see the sun. With a lunar eclipse, you can't see the moon. With Mercury and Venus closest to the Earth in retrograde, you can't see them because they're behind the sun's beams. Um, so with Saturn and Neptune in their balsamic phase of their cycle, the balsamic phase is considered, the letting go, the kind of emptying
Mm.
out, letting
Mm-hmm.
go kind of phase. So they're sort of also in a
Mm-hmm.
almost like there's a blind spot there as they're getting
Mm-hmm.
closer together as well. I wouldn't say it's a cazimi, but when you're there's there's not another term for combust other than using the sun, but when planets get, somewhat close to one another until they actually make their conjunction, there could be an overpowering of one planet by the other and
Mm-hmm.
all of that. And of course, it was on the moon's north node, so that is the eclipse, you know,
Yeah.
area. So it's almost like what was happening is, okay, we're going to go ahead now. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to charge ahead. Let's go, guys. But we can't see anything. And the
Mm,
planets, we're blind and we can't see where we're going, but we're going to do it anyway.
right. And one thing about the severed relationships, and we're definitely seeing that geopolitically, we'll talk about the Venus retrograde began in such close timing to that at this point, sort of a legendary Oval Office encounter between Trump and JD Vance and Zelensky from the Ukraine, and that
Yeah,
created all this like rippling effect with all these other um,
yeah.
alliances and causing big major changes happening, which goes back
Mhm.
to really a lot of alliances that go back to post World War II, which interestingly,
Yep,
World War II was um, drawing to an end during a previous Venus retrograde in Aries time period and
1945.
1945. Yeah. And so just lots of big changes with that. And then at the same time, I guess what we often think about, or at least I often think about when I think about protest and Venus retrograde, and I guess you could say my own political bias, I think about more like social justice, liberation, and protests promoting diversity and equity and inclusiveness. And but what we
Which is
had,
gone now, which is
yeah,
now on the chopping block, basically.
right.
Yeah.
And so we were seeing lots of attacks on literal DEI um, initiatives and departments and um, issues around LGBTQ rights, trans rights, rights affecting women, which is another
Hmm.
issue as we've talked about. We actually have often seen in past Venus retrograde and Aries periods women gaining more rights and working
Hmm.
towards voting rights. Now, that also means, though, in the past, women were fighting and having to fight and resist, and there was a lot of
Hmm.
conflict over these same issues. But we sort of had an interestingly, um, I don't know what the right term is, right wing. You can't really say to me it's totally conservative because there was also a lawlessness. It's like almost like to me the government, instead of like civil disobedience of the people protesting, and we have seen some of that. We are actually seeing the president of the United States and the government being like, we don't have to listen to the law. Like we're gonna like not listen to the courts and we're not gonna follow the law and we're just gonna do whatever we want. We're not gonna follow any kind of precedent and then we're going to have this
Yeah.
really big backlash, try to bring in this backlash, like, and this would be people that don't like the way things have changed over time with greater emphasis on diversity and inclusiveness. There's a really interesting element of that, and I do also see protests coming in, and I think there's a lot of protests movements building, and as you're saying, a lot of these initiatives didn't end up working, and we have justices coming in and judges trying to hold the law. There's lots of legal teams all amassing ways to combat this as well. But it's just really interesting the way that all came together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think when Mars was still in Cancer, there were three oppositions between Mars and Pluto during this long retrograde of Mars as well, and we're in Cancer, and this last one was in Aquarius. But just as Mars is was like starting to emerge from Cancer, or at least go over the United States Pluto in Cancer and oppose again, it was a doubling effect of that activism because you think of Pluto and Aquarius, the whole 20-year period, you think of the idea of power to the people,
Hmm.
like what John Lennon had said, power to the people. And he had an Aquarius moon,
Hmm.
but and he was one of the original 60s activists. But the um, if it's what was I going to say? Oh, the if there's if things are kind of going along, even though things are not great, but if they're going along and your rights are you still have your rights and you still have your freedoms and you still have, your basic needs met, but there's still things wrong. It's not going to induce a lot of people to get up and be activists, even though there are things to be angry about or to protest. But when they're piled on and piled on the way they have been in this last couple of months, this is what's sort of, you know, makes creates the
Mm,
outrage that enough people are going to get up and say something or do something about it. So I think coupled, the Aries star point coupled now with Pluto and Aquarius is a very unique moment to see, really, because we know we just had the US Pluto return. We know we're having the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and we're about to have the first Venus star point return in
hmm
2026 as well. We're kind of in between those periods right now. We are having a constitutional crisis.
right. And
And
the Constitution
where
is,
are we going with that?
mm,
And I've thought a lot about that. I've thought a lot about the North Node of the US in Leo, with the South Node in Aquarius, early degrees, and this Mars Pluto opposition
mhm,
hitting them. Mars is now, Mars has really been activating it. Mars is just going over it still now. Pluto not within orb, but not quite finished yet. It's still going to take a little time. But what does you know the the first time around we had a revolution to break from the monarchy. And now we're having this whole reversal of somebody trying to make America like a monarchy again, wanting to declare himself king and not to have the kind of, but even when you think of England as, okay, it has a monarchy, and many countries that do have royalty still have um, a parliament, or they have a governing body that's different, but it doesn't always agree. Uh, in other words, the head of state, the royal family is a figurehead and doesn't necessarily um, go have a political voice. And if it does, it's probably behind the scenes. But it's not like an out front thing. But I'm sure, that can be influenced behind the scenes, the voice of the monarch. But this is this is really kind of crazy when you think about it, that what are the nodes of the United States really representing with that Leo Aquarius thing is
mhm.
is this whole idea of, we still, the people, we the people. This is the big issue now, that for the
Mm.
next few years.
Yeah, and the Constitution, U.S. Constitution, of course, was a Pluto and Aquarius event. And even when you look at the history of Pluto and Aquarius, as well as Neptune and Aries, as well as even the Saturn-Neptune cycle, I remember seeing there are some different overlaps with different things through time, whether it's like the Magna Carta or other different leaders coming in that have given people more rights and things that are not unlike, due process. And that's been one of, I think, the things that has of everything, I think maybe the thing that ends up start really uniting people into more of a resistance and power of the people has been the gross negligence of due process and just pulling people off the streets and sending them off to I mean, really severe prisons in foreign countries, and now
Yeah.
and making mistakes, arresting people that do not appear to be guilty even of what they are insinuating, and taking away people's freedom of speech to have a political opinion, and pulling them off the streets just because of a certain political opinion they've given. So that's one of the, yeah, I think there's a way that
That that
mm,
was the part of the so many things happening in the news that made me cringe, but I think the most cringeworthy event of this whole period for me, really like making me literally sick,
mm,
was that especially that one case that was the administrative error that this man shouldn't have been rounded up and sent, and then nobody claiming any kind of responsibility that they can do anything about it. It's very scary because it says that that mistake could happen to anybody.
right.
And
And
what is your what's the recourse?
yes, and so when we're talking about several relationships, we're seeing this geopolitically. I think you were mentioning, I think personally, you've known a lot of personal relationships that perhaps have ended, or you were just seeing those people you know. I think you were saying that's definitely something, but also just
Yeah, well, yeah,
children and families, and the way this is
people,
ripping families
yeah.
apart and taking parents away from children, and that sort of thing. We're
Hmm.
definitely
Hmm.
seeing that
Yeah,
with this too.
definitely.
Well, would
Hmm.
this be, if we want
Oh,
to, should we?
so much to talk about. I mean, there have been
Yeah.
so many things. We'll have to figure, you know,
Yeah,
it,
well, we
we'll
can't
have
talk
to
about
pare it
everything. That's
down.
like a good thing. Yeah, there's way too many things. We could easily talk for probably 10 hours, at least an easily flowing 5 hour conversation, which we're not going to do. So we will be
Yeah,
focusing down. How about I'll just share some slides here to kind of frame it, and we
I'd
can
love to
go
see
into,
what you have. Yeah,
yeah, then we have some of your slides too to share. All right.
nice graph.
Oh yeah, thank you. My wife Jeannie, who you met in Greece, actually made this for me. She's a
Yeah.
graphic designer, which I feel very blessed by, because at times I can be like, this is a perfect example. I really like to
Uh-huh.
have a Saturn Neptune balsamic cycle image, and then she's like, I'll just
Right.
draw that real quick for you. Here you go. So yeah, I this is to represent what you were talking about. So I'm really glad you brought that up, that we are actually dealing with a balsamic Saturn Neptune. They're incredibly close right now as we're talking. They're now within like 4, maybe even 3 degrees of each other. Saturn has not
Yeah.
yet come into Aries while you and I are talking right now. That'll happen, but less than a month from now. Saturn will be
Right.
going into Aries. And yeah, like you were saying, as they come to the end of their cycle, there is this real to me, it's very non-linear, sort of like we're seeing all these like throwbacks to people wanting to go back to a past period of time, or the way things used to be, especially this like in the way the Make America Great movement seems to have this idealistic, in some cases delusional picture of what the way things used to be. And when we're looking at some of even like the education things being like saying, the way you're teaching history, you're wrong to talk about racism, and the fact that indigenous communities were removed from the land, and not wanting to talk about social justice issues relating to history, and thinking that that's anti-American, and to do that. Or there's things starting to go through about wanting to give, well, you give Christianity more importance, and this is anti-Christian, and actually the government should be funding Christian schooling and Christian perspectives. And one thing with Saturn and Neptune we have to always watch is, through history we do see potential and realities of religious fundamentalism, totalitarian religious use, dogmatic, textual, and persecuting other groups. We've seen the Inquisition happening, the literal Inquisition the literal witch hunts, and we can also think the way witch hunts gets used more metaphorically for things like we were just talking about, detaining people and just throwing them on a flight to fly them off to some prison somewhere and yanking people off the streets. So that's definitely a big thing just going on with this Saturn Neptune cycle coming to an end. Although there's also with Saturn Neptune activist change and all sorts of things like that that are also getting stirred up. And they, of course, this summer on July 13th, right when Saturn will station retrograde at 2 Aries, pretty close to that Venus star point. Neptune will be at 2 Aries, pretty close to that Venus star point. They'll be almost
Mhm.
together, but they will actually come together next February 20th at 0 Aries at the world point. Is there anything about the world point right now you would just like to say before we go into this a little bit more about why that's so important? I know you have it on a slide. Maybe we can share that for your slide.
Yeah, I
Let's
have
share it
some
for
road
your,
point slides. I
yeah.
love this graphic.
Oh, yeah.
You must tell Jeannie that really
Yeah.
good, really
Yeah.
good work.
Yeah. I love this too. Yeah. So, yeah, when I was researching Saturn Neptune, I just got into drawing this glyph a lot in my notes. And I know in Heinrich Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, he has some different things like this where he's combined planetary glyphs. And yeah, again, she just made that for me, which is awesome. So the thing I wanted to point out before we go into a little bit more with what you're going to share is what's interesting about these Saturn Neptune conjunctions is that the last two which also happened in cardinal signs. One thing about the Saturn Neptune cycle across time is there is like a quadruplicity sequence where they'll do like two or three, there'll be like a few cardinal ones, and there'll be two or three mutable ones, and there'll be like a few in fixed signs. And it actually just keeps cycling like that. And since 1953, we've been in a sequence of cardinal sign Saturn Neptune conjunctions. This will be the last one. And until this one, they've all been in signs of Saturn. So the 1989 one was in Capricorn, the domicile of Saturn. The 53 one was in Libra, the exaltation of Saturn. And both of these past two ones that are kind of feeding into this one had a strong connection with the Venus star point in Aries. So in 1989, there was a superior conjunction of Venus, interestingly, that combined Mercury, except for Venus and Mercury, instead of it being the retrograde inferior conjunctions like we just had, this was a combination of Mercury Venus superior conjunctions with the sun, where they're moving really fast on the other side of the sun from us. And they
Mhm,
formed a square aspect with the Saturn Neptune conjunction that was coming together at that time.
mhm. That was a pretty powerful year if we think back to all the changes that happened at that time, some of which maybe we may be seeing echoes of in this time.
Yeah, so I mean, so for example,
I
this
didn't know that about the sequence with the Saturn Neptune that they go cardinal fixed mutable. That's really cool.
yeah, it's actually really fascinating. I haven't heard anyone talk about it much. I've shared it in a
Oh,
few talks I've done. Yeah, as far as I can tell, it goes really far back, and it takes a lot of reason. I started trying to put some things together to make it more coherent, but yeah, I think there's a really interesting pattern. And what I feel like, because cardinal signs tend to initiate something, I do kind of feel like looking at it, there seems like some new sort of Saturn Neptune thing gets kind of initiated when the cardinal ones come in, and then it goes to mutable, and then it goes to so like the Renaissance, and then into like the Age of Enlightenment, and then this period where like the last few when we hit these cardinal ones. But things at this time, like such, for example, I mean, what's the big power thing now? What's going on now? One is the internet, social media, the World Wide Web. World Wide Web was proposed at this time. We had, right, Berlin Wall coming down. We had the Tiananmen Square protests, I think, starting to build around this time in China last time when this happened. There was eventually the dissolution of the Soviet Union, many other things. But certainly things that relate to what's been going on with Ukraine and Russia now, and how that was really set off at the stationing. I guess it also makes me think this was a time in the United States when the religious right was gaining enormous power, and it was something that people's minds and attention were getting turned to. I was like 14 when this happened, and I remember I was in middle school, and then when I was in high school in the early 90s, I did papers and like my politics classes like about the religious right and just what was going on, and it was a lot of stuff which you can say they've recently they're achieving things right now. They were able to get all abortion rights taken away and reproductive rights taken away, and there's other things they're trying to do right now. So that I think that's very alive too from this time because the religious right was really building here, coming off the Reagan
Yeah, and it
years.
was George H.W. Bush was president, and
Mm-hmm.
I remember his idea about 1,000 points of light, and it
Mm,
sounded really cool. 1,000 points of light, like around the globe. In terms of doesn't that sound cool to have 1,000 points of light? But the way he meant it was something different.
mm-hmm.
And it wasn't that, we're all going to be enlightened or something, and we're all going to, it was like, I think what you're saying, it was setting into motion the things that it was starting to draft the early um, ideology of what this Project 2025
Mm-hmm.
is laying out right now. It's taken a while to get there, but um, 4 years later, in 1993, Uranus caught up with Neptune, and they had their conjunction, set of three, I think, three conjunctions between 1992 and 1993, and a little bit later on in Capricorn. And that was another year of 4 years later, the Venus star
Right.
point, but it was retrograde that year, Venus in Aries, maybe 1 or 2 degrees um, lower in zodiac than what it's showing here. So that was also a time. But I think when Uranus and Neptune came together, there was a feeling. So 1993, Bill Clinton was president,
Mm-hmm.
and the Uranus Neptune period, if you remember the early 90s, I really remember this well, it was really kind of more of a feeling of hope and um, just uh, kind of, I don't know, there was that Uranus Neptune feeling in the air was breaking through to new dimensions, and
Mm,
it was people were really opening up to cosmic kinds of
mm-hmm.
principles. And uh, yet on the political scene, of course, there were still things going on. In the 90s, we had Europe had, there was a nasty war in um, Bosnia
Mm,
and Bosnia Herzegovina. And again, borders and boundaries were shifting and changing. We had new borders drawn at that point from that war, and also the early 90s were many different boundaries were changed when the Soviet Union came apart in the 1989 to the early 90s, and the former Soviet bloc countries became independent nations of their own. So you're right about in Capricorn, this conjunction really had to do with have to do with governing and politics and uh, who's in charge of what, and things shifting.
yeah, absolutely. And when you're bringing all that up, it makes me think of a couple other things because, like you're right, 4 years later, 93, we have a previous Venus retrograde in Aries period. That's after Bill Clinton's elected. and Hillary Clinton. We had a woman coming in that was a very, like, I think very representative of Venus retrograde in Aries, like strong, very strong first lady who's going to take on, I'm going to create healthcare, bring in great healthcare access to people, which didn't work out. And a lot of people didn't like this strong-willed, intelligent woman coming in, doing that either at that next one. But there was so much change. I mean, this was a very powerful one, like you were saying, because it was also as Saturn and Neptune are coming together, it was the beginning of a Saturn Uranus cycle. It was the ending of a Uranus Neptune cycle. Then we had the beginning of a Uranus Neptune cycle. And interestingly, we are coming in later this, we're coming into a period now where Uranus will be coming into Gemini, and we're coming into the sextile, waxing sextile out of this. So that's something else we're going to be really seeing. That's a good point you were making about the 90s and the Uranus Neptune, because it's also relevant how that's going to all come together here in these next years. So if we go back to the previous one,
Yeah.
1953, that was a really powerful one because we had Venus retrograde star point right opposite them. Um, and there's again many things we could talk about with this also. But one thing that stood out to me with this one was Christine Jorgensen, who a couple months before this, after having sex reassignment, a trans woman became got a lot of public attention, kind of became a celebrity when she came back to New York City, and there was a lot of attention brought to trans people, and this has just become a big issue this time around. There was also
Yeah,
at the same time
she was the
McCarthyism.
first, at least public one. Yeah.
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 There's also the Red Scare and McCarthyism that was going on. That was very much like witch trial kind of thing. And I always think it's interesting that based upon this, Arthur Miller wrote the Crucible play that was sort of commenting on McCarthyism and the Red Scare, but literally was a witch hunt. The
Hmm.
same witch trials in the Salem, yeah, with a crucible. So that's another thing that we can see with this sort of political landscape of making accusations about people, sometimes accurate, sometimes not, and their political allegiances and that sort of thing.
Yeah. That was also the year, I believe, was that the year of the polio vaccine that was, I'm pretty
Ooh,
sure it was in this 1953 era
it might have been. I can't.
that
That I
it,
don't remember. Um,
yeah, that made big news. And because I was looking at, I know this 1953 Aries star point was really big because it was, as you can see, Venus is retrograde opposite Saturn and Neptune square Chiron, and a little bit later in that year, Uranus came into that was a 4 point cardinal cross, and so it was really a dynamic year.
yeah. There was, yeah, 19, you're right. There was a successful development of the polio vaccine in 1953. And he announced his findings on March 26th. So it was actually
Right before that
quite
Venus star point.
right
Yeah,
there. So that is a big deal. Vaccines are,
probably as Venus was just coming out of Pisces, going into Aries, right around that time. Yeah,
mm, well, yeah, definitely. There was also, I mean, lots of stuff we could go into.
yeah,
The
yeah.
psychedelic era was sort of beginning in some ways, in a weird way, with the U.S. government, MK Ultra, just like buying all this acid and kind of brainwashing people with it. And but like Aldous Huxley and the Doors of Perception were happening around this time too. I mean,
Hmm.
another thing I always think about this time is just the television era is such a big deal, which then I
Oh
always
yeah.
think of how that television era here. mutates into the internet, basically at the 89 one.
Yeah.
And the way our we can think about the Venus star point, our social relationships changing, the way the star points come in with them. How does that break up the way things have been and kind of establish new norms or consensus patterns of
Hmm.
behavior and that sort of thing? And
Hmm.
strangely, kind of bridging and connecting people in new ways, but then also creating weird, unintended, perhaps consequences. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
Certainly,
That's
lots of
interesting about
propaganda comes with it.
the
Yeah.
television era. I hadn't thought about that, but that is true. That's exactly when that happened,
Oh,
the
yeah. Absolutely.
50s.
Yep. Even the rock and
Television.
roll era. I mean, rock and roll was happening already, but it was black musicians, and it was later. By the end of these, I think it was more the '54 one, if I remember. Maybe it was the '53 one. But Elvis, one of these, it was either the '53 or '54 in July. It's like it's so close to the exact timing of when Elvis walks into a recording studio for the first time to record a song for his mom. Well, he says it's to record a song for his mom, but it kind of brings him to their attention. It's like a year later when he finally records like the big "That's All Right" like hit rock single. But so much
Hmm.
was happening and changing. Malcolm X in this time period emerges from prison, takes the name, starts mobilizing lots of civil rights protests also happening at this time, which is, I guess that's an important one to
More
mention.
activism.
Lots of
Yeah,
civil
more
rights
activism.
because the Brown versus Board of Education happened a little bit after this, but there was already a lot of stuff happening to sort of get that Brown versus Board of Education ruling. Martin Luther King's a few years later, but everything's things are really moving in that direction. And so that's another interesting kind of backlash against a bunch of that stuff that we've been dealing with.
Yeah.
So just to hit a few points before we go a little bit more into this. So Venus stationed retrograde March 1st, about 10, almost 11 degrees of Aries. We had the inferior star point on March 22nd. Venus went back into Pisces then. Didn't get to the 15 degrees separation away from, or 10 degrees separation, whatever degree range you might normally use for Venus until a little bit later. But one thing that I was fascinated by was apparently this was an interesting one where at one point around like March 17th, March 18th, Venus was still, I don't know where you could have seen this, but supposedly technically visible as both an evening star and a morning star. And even though you probably wouldn't be able to have visually seen that in your location, um,
It was
astronomically,
possible. I read that too on
yeah,
the day, right around the day of the Kazemi,
hmm,
because it's not usually, it almost never happens. But I
yeah,
think it's because what they were explaining is it's so close to the equinox points, that right there, um, Venus, early degree
mm,
Aries, that the rising and setting it was possible to see it on both sides,
yeah.
which is kind of awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if symbolically, even though you wouldn't think it, because of everything happening, did that create some kind of interesting symbolic integration potential that we
Hmm.
had evening star, morning star happening at the
Right.
same time? In any case, what's so
Yeah.
powerful, she comes back to Pisces, she gets together with Neptune. There's a solar eclipse. Neptune goes into Aries, and then she stations direct April 12th. Right on that total lunar eclipse point of being opposite where it was in March 15th. And over the course of this, really powerfully, she has three conjunctions with Saturn, three conjunctions with Neptune, three conjunctions with the North Node, and three sextile aspects with both Pluto and Uranus. And so to look at the whole cycle, when she got up to max elongation, and then January 10th is when she hit that point, and that's about a week before she made her first contact with Saturn, which was around like January 18th. She then came into her, she got, then she was, she's getting closer and closer, brighter and brighter to us. And then, went through the whole retrograde as far as stationing, reanimation, stationing direct. We're just past the max brightness now, and she won't get to that next greatest height until June 1st. So we're still in the period where she hasn't gone to that max elongation yet, but we're
Mm-hmm.
we're in that
Thing
maximum
I
brightness
should
place.
mention that, Trump was born with a Venus-Saturn conjunction in
Yes.
Cancer, in late
Mm-hmm.
degrees of Cancer. And this cycle of the Venus retrograde had three passes of Venus and Saturn together in late degrees of Pisces. So Venus and Saturn in the sky three times were trining Trump's natal Venus-Saturn conjunction. And there's a resonance there when you've got
Yeah.
two planets in the sky together that are in your chart. And they may or may not be making aspect, but in this case, to each other, but in this case they were.
Mm-hmm.
And I was noticing that, and I was feeling like this was giving him more power and more strength and more, because normally Venus with Saturn is, Venus is not doing so well with Saturn, uh, especially with relation regard to Venusian things, relationships and money. And we have seen now during this Venus Saturn three times that the economic situation in the country has really taken a nosedive. And it's been like on a roller coaster. And we also have seen that there have been many, many, many severed relationships. We'll go into that a little bit more. I've got some slides on that. But I was
Yeah.
thinking that Venus is just now, just in the last few days, past the orb with Saturn. It's just went into Aries again. It's out of Pisces now. It's in Aries. It's moving away from Saturn. It's going to pick up speed now. It's going to gain speed now that it's not retrograde, and it's going to start moving pretty quickly. And so it's going to be separating. So that it felt like before nothing could touch anything he did or said. There was always this protective, like Saturn, protective rings around him or something, and that there was no recourse. And I'm thinking now that Venus is beyond Saturn, let's just see how things might change,
Mm.
because that trine is no longer in effect for him anymore, although for the first 100 days it definitely was in effect three times, not just once. So, and because of the retrograde, it was an elongated effect. So I'm also looking at that.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah. Um, and one thing about that you're saying, and actually this particular graphic, it's a little bit tuned into the Mercury cycle more because it's not necessarily if you this 15 degrees separation is not exactly what's happening with Venus when at the stations, but after the inferior conjunction, and then after Venus went back into Pisces towards the end of March. It wasn't too long after that. It was a few days after the solar eclipse and after Neptune went into Aries that he had that like liberation day. I think it was like April 2nd. Mercury
Mhm.
was still retrograde, and
Yep.
but just from like that April 2nd, by the time we got to Venus stationing direct, which was that Libra full moon, he had already pulled back on a lot of those tariffs. I mean, some tariffs did go through, but in terms of some of the many of the reciprocal tariffs that just seemed it was really even more excessively extreme, and it was really rattling all the economic markets. Yeah, that all happened there. And I guess, before we can go into looking at your slides, but something else that happened right around the station, which just I think we could talk about briefly. That just will illustrate a little bit more what you're going to talk about with the Venus star point and how that lines up with people would be the Oscars. So, in case anybody has seen, Chris Brennan and Nick Dagan Best did an astrology podcast going through like a bunch of old history. And one thing of Venus cycles, and one thing that they brought up, which I hadn't realized before, was the Oscars' relationship with this cycle, including the first Oscars in like 1929 when Venus
Yes, Aries
retrograde.
retrograde.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's an interesting
The first
thing of
star
different
point
Oscar.
in Aries.
What's that?
That was the first star point in Aries.
First star point in Aries. Yeah, the first star point in
Was
Aries.
1929.
Yeah,
And I
that was.
know they called it Venus retrograde repetitions, and they were looking at all the Aries
Mm,
every 8 years, the Aries retrograde. That was a fabulous program that they did a lot of really great research on that. Yeah.
yeah, and so that and you can watch that one to see all the stuff about the Oscars they go to, but it's interesting. And so what happens every 8 years? And so what was really interesting this time was the Oscars have often had important changes happen during the Venus retrograde in Aries subsequently, and this time the awards happened like right basically at the same time. It was on March 2nd, like the Venus was literally stationing retrograde when the Oscars
Yes.
happened. Partially, this was a big deal, which we'll talk a little bit more about with you in a moment, because it's, the Los Angeles fires were in the aftermath of
Yeah.
all the fires going on. And this movie, Honora, comes in and just is this, you know, unbelievably decorated
I hadn't
film.
seen Mikey Madison's chart before, but that's a hoot. It's
Yeah, it's a real, yeah. So, a few things about it which are very Venus retrograde in Aries, I think, kind of classically. One is that Honora is actually an independent film. It was not this big Hollywood production. And one of the things about the Los Angeles fires, just in relationship to Hollywood, is like Hollywood hasn't really been doing well. There aren't great movies really being made anymore for the. I mean, very every so often there's like some good films, but in
yeah.
general, like it's been struggling. So we have this independent film come in. The filmmaker Sean Baker won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Film Editing, which is just, it was sort of like a singular. He's the only person to ever win 4 Oscars for the same film in the same ceremony, and to hit that like that quadruple thing as a filmmaker is just amazing. He wrote the screenplay, he edited the film, he directed the film, and it won the Best Picture. There's something about that sort of creative Aries that's very
That's pretty
resonant.
amazing.
Yeah, and then the
Yeah.
film's about Mikey Madison's character is a stripper, a sex worker, so it's got this countercultural Venus element happening. And she's very young. She's not the youngest actress to win an Oscar, but she was up against much more accomplished, experienced women, and it was a surprise uh, win in that way. And so she's only what she was almost not quite 26 when this happens. But this is just
Hmm.
showing the awards night with Venus stationing
Yeah.
retrograde, right close to her
Retrograde.
Jupiter. Yeah, and then she's got a Sagittarius midheaven that Jupiter
Yeah.
rules, and then when you go a little bit later, close to her birthday after the Oscars, just to show that star point,
Yep.
very close to her
Venus star
sun.
point out very close to her sun.
Yeah.
But the other thing I'm noticing here that is really cool, what we just talked about, is she's got a Venus Saturn conjunction in her chart. And so
Mm,
the triple Venus Saturn conjunction this whole season was playing into her chart as well.
it's a really good point. Yeah, and a Mars retrograde even um,
Yeah, yeah.
connected to
Mars
them.
retrograde. Yeah. Opposite Venus. Isn't that interesting that
Yeah.
she um I mean, life imitates art, art imitates life. She played this character who truly was young and even though she was a sex worker, kind of innocent. She falls in love with this client, this client um, who wants to hire her and and take her away from the job, but to have her for like a whole week or whatever. And uh, now I'm looking at her Venus Saturn conjunction opposite Mars in Taurus Scorpio in her chart. And it's almost like the character she played and what she won an Oscar for is so speaks so much to that Saturn Venus conjunction opposite Mars, Taurus Scorpio.
Yeah, it's a really good
And
point.
really it really is. And not to spoiler alert for people who haven't seen the film, but she really does fall in love. She believes this guy, she falls in love with him. She's young, she's kind of innocent. In I don't want to say innocent, but she's a little bit naive about love, let's say. And she does fall in love with him and she really believes him and that she's this little Cinderella story is she's going to marry this very well-to-do son of a Russian oligarch and until they're and until it all comes crashing down on her. And but she just doesn't walk away as a victim. She
Mm,
doesn't walk away as a victim. She takes the issue into her own hands and she really she fights with as much power and strength as she can muster up that Venus, Saturn, Mars. And but in the end, I won't tell the ending for people who haven't seen it. In the end, it, she has this huge breakthrough and realization about the whole thing. Uh, but it was a surprise that it won so many things. But there were such good themes in that. There were such really interesting twists and turns to the story. How it all kind of worked out.
yeah, also
Yeah.
interesting that she's Mercury retrograde in Pisces, basically opposite, right where the lunar eclipse happened. It's right where Venus ends up stationing direct with Saturn, and at the night of the Oscars, Mercury was still in Pisces, like moving across Neptune, but sort of around there. And then when you're mentioning the Mars, this is after Mars had stationed direct, but Mars basically had come retrograde and stationed like right with her Cancer moon. And then when you were just talking about that, it made me think. I know you're going to share a little more, but you're talking about the United States nodes, right? And the South node in Aquarius and North node in Leo. So it's kind of interesting. I hadn't thought about this before, but apparently this is a correct birth chart for her, and she's got those nodes like right pretty angular with Uranus. Also, the Neptune being where Pluto is pretty interesting. So yeah, a lot of stuff going on with her chart. That's pretty fascinating.
Hmm.
Would you like
Yeah.
to share your slides then? We'll take a look at those.
Yeah. Is this a good time? I
Yeah,
mean, we're going to come back to some of yours because I think you've got some more that are interesting, but we
yeah,
can segue into mine
we
because I
yeah. I think we should segue into yours. Let's do that.
just reviewing the idea of Venus retrograde cycle of 2025 was going to circle over the world point 3 times. And um, when we got together the first time, we were looking at that phenomena of the world point, and we were saying, okay, let's see what this is going to bring. What is this actually going to bring? And what is the world point? Well, it's the 0 degree cardinal. It's other degrees too, but 0 degree cardinal really.
Yeah.
There it is. I'm looking for. Sorry, I'm looking for the next button to push for
Uh,
the next slide. There
there
it
we
is.
go.
The
Yeah.
0 degree cardinal is, the four cardinal signs, Aries, Libra, Cancer, Capricorn, that are this really what are also solstice and equinox points. But they also it also there's subsidiary points that are world points too. That 15 degrees of fixed and certain degrees of mutable. I think it's 7 mutable and 22, and there's others too. But I think the zero cardinal and especially the zero Aries is very important
Hmm.
because zero Aries is the spring equinox in the north. The Aries equinox is the chart that's always been used historically to look at mundane factors in the world. What's going to happen for the world, what or for the country, or for the, you can center that chart over your own location and see, how are things going to go kind of in my own land. And so we had so much activity going over zero Aries, as you've mentioned, as we've both mentioned before. Neptune at zero Aries 3 times, Saturn at zero Aries 3 times. Those won't complete until 2026.
Right.
Venus at zero Aries 3 times during this retrograde period. The Venus star point will hit zero Aries, but not until
Hmm.
the 2030s. So another decade from now, it will it will be happening. So it's almost like it's stretching out this whole world, involvement of these planets going over these world points. Uh, and then of course the Mercury retrograde, which almost patterned exactly the place in the zodiac that Venus retrograde. Mercury was also passing over those points 3 times during this
Yeah.
period.
That's pretty,
That's a lot.
yeah. That's pretty amazing about the Venus star point in March 2037 because that will be towards the very end of the Neptune transit of Aries. So there really is
Okay.
something interesting that they form their first conjunction, which we just experienced pretty much on the cardinal axis at the world point. And
Mm-hmm.
then as we come to the end of Neptune being in Aries, we'll get a Venus star point right there. I don't know. There's something about that that
Mm-hmm.
definitely
Good
feels
point.
important.
Are we going to really know what just happened?
But as you've talked about, the last time we talked about, we also simultaneously in these years have a Libra star point coming in. So
Yeah,
there's going to be something being rebalanced
yeah.
coming out of
The
this. Yeah.
Libra will come in from the top end, 29, 28, and the Aries is leaving from the bottom end at 0. So they're not exactly opposition. The only time on the Venus star chart that you have two signs on the star at the same time that are opposition points, because that almost never happens, would be when one is leaving and the other one is coming in. The opposition
Hmm.
point is coming in. So while they're not technically by degree opposition or even by orb, you could make a case for Aries Libra being together at the same time, a pretty important period for that whole the issues that we have been talking about and we will be talking about as far as Aries Libra. I mean, Libra actually, brings up the issue, obviously, of traditional relationships and marriage and
Hmm.
partnering and all of that. Um, and how things how things during the Aries 100-year period of Aries have changed. The 100 years of Venus star in Aries has given rise to female independence and sovereignty and women's rights issues, and uh, less and less people are going for traditional marriage the way they did before. Before it was like, this is what people do, this is what you do. But it's been for a while now, many decades, that this is not what you do. It's it's what maybe you would like to do, maybe the way it's always been, but those kind of things, cultural shifts have been happening.
Mm,
to question the idea of traditional matrimony. And even if there is traditional matrimony, it raises the idea of the balance between the power balance, the equality, the Libra issues of what's really happening here. So, yeah. So as you said, there's a lot we could talk about, but I'm
mhm.
gonna keep moving
Yeah,
on.
keep
It's
going. That's
hard to
great.
see that. Okay. And you already showed this, but I wanted to just, this is a slide we showed before. I added a couple of points to it that on January 28th, the Venus retrograde phase of this year really began when the pre-retrograde phase, when she entered the shadow at 24 Pisces, and that she doesn't exit that retrograde phase until May 16th. We're recording this on May 4th. We're almost now there. So we've been through all of these different uh, connections that
Mm,
Venus has had, the three world points, the two eclipses that you mentioned in between it. We
hmm.
also had Mercury retrograde in between it, the Neptune and Saturn. So yeah, Venus has been busy in this retrograde,
Yeah.
two signs.
Have when
Two
you've
signs, all these planets. Venus has been very busy making and breaking relationships and going, deciding to go here and then deciding, nope, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to go here.
right. Have you noticed before, do you know of a previous one where she's stationed like right on the eclipse degrees like this? I was just
Well,
curious if you've seen that
yeah,
before.
you could go back and look and find those.
Hmm.
It's not that common, but it happens.
It happens sometimes, yeah.
I don't have those in my mind right
Oh,
now.
totally fine. Yeah,
Which,
I just yeah, I was just curious if you had because yeah, I haven't. It's not something I've researched. Yeah, it's
yeah.
yeah, it's just really
Yeah.
powerful. And then, like we said, Mercury doing it pretty much very similar degrees. And then that world point again, right? It's like the
Hmm.
celestial equator getting projected out into space and crossing that. I mean, there's like this real point of like things really coming in. So it just that world point you were talking about just kind of takes everything up to just even greater level. I mean, this would be enough as it was, but like it just magnifies it so much more about how big the change is that's happening.
Yeah. I mean, one point you could make is that it's when the world really stands up and takes notice
Mm,
when a planet
mm-hmm,
goes over the world point.
mm-hmm.
And secondly, that things that happen or decisions that are made when planets are on that world point really affect the world.
Really affect
It's
things.
not
Yeah,
just that they stand up and take notice, but it's also affecting
really affect.
this thing, the tariffs and the partnerships, um, that the tariffs that were proposed and the former allies. And this is what I was saying about relationships coming to crashing down rather than old relationships coming back. And as you mentioned, this has been an 80-year relationship since the end of World War II,
Right.
1945. We've had solid, really solid relationship partners with so many countries, with so many European countries, oh, the whole NATO, all of the NATO countries, Canada,
Mm,
Mexico, our closest neighbors are, European um, allies. It's as if these are your closest friends and relationships, and suddenly you are having a big party and they're all there, and you just say, okay, all right, you're out. You're not going to be part of this anymore. Get out. Or you're doing things to really threaten those relationships. It's like
yeah,
basically saying, I want a divorce.
absolutely. And
And surprise, surprise, I want a divorce.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
the 80-year thing made me remember too how 1945, end of World War II, concentration camps getting exposed, Hitler kills himself. That's also a repetition of the Mercury retrograde because every 40 years they'll like line up. So the Mercury retrograde and the Venus retrograde. So it was also that was another one that had that embedded in it, which might be adding into the power of the fact that 1945 had Venus and Mercury retrograde in Aries and getting repeated now. I also was going to say with that affecting the world, even, because we're bringing up some like really devastating effects it's had on people, but still important, even something like astrology conferences, it's affecting. I know there's a big conference coming up, and some people have been afraid to come from other countries to fly into the United States. And that's going to start showing up all
right.
lots of places, lots of cities in the United States that rely on tourism. And people, there's all
It
sorts of
already
ways.
has. I've been watching
Yeah,
videos about that, how the
yeah,
tourist, the border, yeah, the cities between Canada, well, the US cities on this side of the border from Canada are really in devastating, having the devastating economic effects right now. They're just
yeah,
all pretty much shutting down.
yeah. So
You're
this is a,
right. The next year is a big UAC conference, and of
hmm
course, it's still a ways away. We don't know what will be in effect at that point, but of course, this year, well, there's NORWAC that happens every
NORWAC.
year. So,
Yeah, I've heard that there have been some people, although I don't feel like if you have all your paperwork, I don't think it would actually, in my opinion, probably be an issue for you. But I've just heard that there are people that are even right now, for some people have been worried about coming to that. And so hopefully that's something that can be addressed with the UAC conference because it really is such an amazing opportunity for people from all around the world to come together. And hopefully there'll be a lot, pointing out about how it's not, encouraging people to still come because you think about that's like potentially fateful encounters and new relationships that you could form that won't happen if you don't go. It doesn't happen. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it can definitely have all sorts of unintended consequences of where this all could go. Yeah.
right.
But yeah, let's look at this is the Venus star point for Washington D.C.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I noticed was so many planets in the sixth house and how um, Doge was going in and firing people left and right,
Right.
and how many thousands of jobs, essential jobs for many government services and for many of the people of the country were being lost, and that people had to put notice, just signs up on the door of these agencies where people would actually go for services and say, sorry, we're shut down. You know, like people are just kind of left out in the cold. But all the people that have kind of lost their jobs here, because you think of the sixth house as the workforce.
Hmm.
You think of it as the workforce. But Venus star point also empowers, it also energizes the workforce in some way. It energizes whatever it touches, let's say. And in this case, it's in the sixth house, but it's in Aries. And where has the budget basically just been tripled or quadrupled? In the military. And so service jobs are going to be available, and but it's a little bit scary, that early Aries, because Aries and Mars, of course, governed by Mars, is really has to do with the military, and the fact that every other agency is being cut down to the bare essentials, and then the military is just being built up and up and up and up. um, those are pretty frightening signs for any country. to um, to be engaged in. And so that's the one thing. And then the other thing, um, the sixth house has to do with health. And, Chiron is there and all this. And it made me think of all the disease, the Department Center for Disease Control. So many of the health agencies have also been cut. So many uh, treatments that are being proposed right now are non-treatments that are being proposed in the sort of in the medical field. Scientific research and medical research is being cut, slashed. Other things are, coming in to take its place. So, we just have to hope that there's not a huge virus or some kind of communicable disease that starts to spread.
Right.
Because with Saturn and Neptune together, those things are definitely possible. That was the thing I was trying to think of with when you were talking about Saturn Neptune.
Mm.
Is the other pattern with Saturn Neptune is viral infections or diseases, communicable diseases that take place during those periods.
And sort of
And so we have that.
chronic, hard to determine, like hard to see what's. I feel like that's also a Saturn Neptune thing with diseases, like kind of hard to tell exactly what
Exactly.
is going
They
on.
hit you
Yeah.
from, you know, you don't even know it's coming. It's just there before you know it. So there's that. And then if you want to look at, I use some of these other little the dwarf planet
Mm.
Eris and of course Chiron and the black moon. Those are all in the angles of this chart, and we've got Chiron with uh, Eris, and in fact, it's been transiting over Washington since just before the election, and right, and still is. But Eris in the seventh house, right on the seventh house cusp,
Yeah.
another sign of severed relationships, or
Right.
at least, if not severed, I would say Eris right on the seventh house cusp would say um, stirs up stuff in the
Definitely
relationship.
with and with our country, foreign relationships too, for sure. Yeah. With that, there's just other relationships with other countries, definitely. Hmm.
And then if you want to look at the dispositor of all this airy stuff, you get Mars, which is up in the ninth house in Cancer. So
Right.
again, what you just said, foreign
Hmm.
relations, ninth house.
Yeah. And also, I think just adding to all this, like you mentioned it earlier, the fact that even though by the time Venus went retrograde, Mars had already stationed direct, we still had come out of this Mars retrograde in Cancer period leading into this. And so the
Yeah.
Mars retrograde and Mars in Cancer is just such an extreme placement for Mars, being the fall of Mars. It's just and we've seen that with just like real. Yeah, I think it just all added into the extremity of everything for sure. That's really interesting about Mars in the ninth. I didn't know that. I hadn't looked at that, so it makes a lot of sense. Also, the universities, because we haven't mentioned that yet, but they started going after universities and
Yep.
Harvard. The
Yep.
Harvard president ends up standing up to Trump. I wrote down the date of that. I'm trying to remember when it happened. It was right around the stationing direct. So, right after the Libra full moon, right after Venus stations direct, is when the Harvard president, Alan Garber, wrote this letter on April 14th saying that Harvard will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. But there was also like attacks on universities, right? And trying to like make them
Right.
yeah. Mm.
And that, yeah, so there was that Mars in the ninth
Hmm.
in Cancer. And actually Mars stationed at 17 Cancer, and while it wasn't on the United States sun, which is about 12 going into 13
Hmm.
Cancer, it was pretty close, pretty darn close. In other words, it came, you know, if it had been any closer, we could have been in a real a real threatening situation. Um, which I mean, a lot of things have been scary, but maybe not, take cover kind of scary. But that Mars was coming after the US in a way.
Yeah.
And the response to most of the other countries has not been, oh, oh, we're sorry, whatever you want, we'll do whatever you want. Diplomacy, we want to keep this relationship. Oh, please don't, it's been other countries standing up and saying, well, really Martian, really Aries.
Hmm.
Well, if you do that, I'm going to do this.
Yeah,
And oh, then the response over here is, well, if they do that, we're going to do this. So it's sort of like that
absolutely.
that really messy divorce, that
Yeah.
that it's
The
yeah.
Canada one's the one that's really stood out to me the most just because that's become so antagonistic and so martial. And that just really wasn't there before with Canada. We didn't, it just really dramatically changed that dynamic. Something else I wrote down as a date was when Emmanuel Macron gave this speech. It was like March 5th, a few days after Venus stationed, not too long after that Zelensky Trump thing, where he was really
Mhm.
asserting how France has nuclear weapons and we're going to kind of form our own thing now. And yeah, it's just really dramatic. We're really more isolationist, isolating of America for sure.
Right, right. Okay, what have we got next? Okay, so this was the thing I was really, kind of chuckling about, but it's also sad. I mean, it's really sad that the idea of making big major decisions during a Mercury retrograde or a Venus retrograde, and whether you're going to go through with them or whether they're going to backtrack or just completely collapse. So we have a couple of war things. Israel and Hamas back in January announced a ceasefire before the retrogrades. And then it was retracted. The fighting has been going on. US support of Ukraine for the past 3 years since the war began was suddenly reversed. And not only was it reversed, but in that famous Zelensky meeting, uh, you know, Trump is basically saying, well, you started the war, and trying to
Mm-hmm.
change the narrative, really flip the narrative so
Mm-hmm.
that in psychological dynamics, you would say that if you are communicating with another person or you're trying to negotiate with another person, well, it's a classic like projection or um, no, I didn't say this, you said that. Okay. Or I'm not going to take responsibility for that, even though I did that. That's your fault. It's that kind of mentality of projecting it onto the other. Relationships, US and Russia, formerly difficult, suddenly friends. US and Canada, our greatest ally, is now our antagonist. US Mexico, similar to Canada, stands up to the US. And yay for Claudia Scheinbaum. She's doing a great job with, standing up. US EU relationships very icy since the start of this presidency, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better. I'm seeing, because I live in Europe, I'm seeing all kinds of little video clips of how different European countries are taking American products off their shelf. They're boycotting American companies. They're not buying, they've got an app now in France. They actually have an app that you can put on your phone that you can just scan whatever product that you're looking at, and it will show if it's made in the US. And if it is, they're not buying it. They're going to go for the one next to it, because sometimes it's very obvious that products are made in the US, things like Coca-Cola or McDonald's or Starbucks or things
Mm.
like that. But other companies have had in the past European um, alliances with European companies that might produce the brand under a different name, but it's still a US product. And so this app will actually show them if it really is a US company. So that's in France now. Who knows where else it will spread? But I'm also seeing other stories like this, kind
Mm.
of crop up. Um, so since the in the economy, since the relationships, the cabinet members in the Trump are
Mm.
changing. So Elon Musk came in like a house of fire, and then now is exiting. And I think remember that other really Mercury retrograde snafu with that signal chat with
Yeah,
that was a really big Mercury retrograde,
right.
kind of
And,
a perfect Mercury retrograde
and Mike
story.
Walls, the national security advisor, was asked to step down, but then he's also then at the same time being asked. Now they're saying, well, maybe he'll be the UN working with the United Nations. But I thought that
Yeah.
was an interesting example because Pete Hedgewith, the Secretary of Defense, he came in also being somebody really against these DEI initiatives and getting rid of actually experienced. I think there's like an African American or somebody that was he got rid of, and then he promoted this person that really was not qualified. But he and of himself just appears to be completely incompetent. He seems like be one of the most incompetent Secretary of Defenses like possibly ever. And
Hmm.
so it's like this real like saying one thing, but it's like where it's going to put this incompetent white person that used to be a TV star as the Secretary of Defense. He's not up to the job at all. Like he keeps messing. He's done other things since the signal chat of he's continued to leak, do other things. Yeah. And Musk is a good
Right.
example
So
too with like all the that was a real like people really revolting against Tesla, and it does seem
yeah.
like it made an effect on him, and he's yeah, like you're saying, he's already kind of been pulling out and stepping back.
Hmm. Hmm. And now I just heard most recently, Musk leaving Doge, okay, with the excuse, well, I have to get back to work. I have a company to run. Tesla's lost billions and its stock just has plummeted. But the board of directors of Tesla are pretty much in conversation about removing Musk
Mm.
from his role there. So he may not have that job that he thinks he has to come back to. We'll see how I think that's still in process.
Hmm.
Then we look at the economy. The US tariffs are announced, then retracted, are put on hold for 90 days. We're not sure where they're going to go. The US and world stock markets plunged, then recovered after the tariff scare. Trading partners as well as US businesses suffer from this whole chaotic run of events. Yeah, the economy's in it's on a roller coaster ride right now. You just don't even know. It's like a dice roll. Is it gonna is where is it going to go? And it's affecting so many businesses who cannot plan, who cannot place orders, who cannot hire people to uh, get uh, not only the orders filled, but the manufacturing that has to happen and the supplies they need to make the products to sell if we're not going to be trading, if nobody's going to be buying. So it's really creating total chaos in that part of the economy as well as others. And
But
then
not.
in jobs,
I'm sorry.
Doge initiates the firing of thousands of government employees in a clean sweep effort to simplify and reduce government waste and spending. Then realizes, oh, some of these people are really necessary and has to rehire them to keep us safe, in many cases. So this is the thing about the retrograde, doing something, then going back on it, doing something, going back, reversing your position. Now that we're coming out of all these retrograde shadows and the shadows of the eclipses and everything, let's just see where it all falls. It's let's see what the future brings. But this was, I can't remember a time really in recent decades even where we had this many things proposed like they were going to be law, like they were going to be made, and then just reversed shortly after. So that's the whole double retrograde, or you could even say triple retrograde because Mars was still coming out of its shadow.
Hmm.
Uh, just not something you see every day. And it doesn't happen every year. It doesn't even happen every decade.
That 90 days thing is interesting too, because it's set for like, I think like the first week or so of July. And that's right in that time period where Saturn and Neptune are getting so close. It's when like Neptune goes retrograde and then Uranus comes into Gemini. And
Uranus
then
is doing
Saturn
the
is
same
right there too. And that's when that's so that 90-day deadline is was really interesting. They set it right at this crucial
thing.
turning point with
Yeah,
astrology. Yeah.
right. And that was the thing, the big announcement today is Liberation Day,
Yeah.
April 2nd. It was almost like the April Fool's joke, today is Liberation Day. And of course, that's when everything really started going topsy-turvy and then, had to backtrack on that.
Yeah.
So,
Or his Trump State of the Union, he's like, "Welcome to the golden era, the golden age." He's like, "The golden age of America. You've never seen anything like this." And then it's like everything tanks almost immediately afterwards.
mhm.
Uh, yeah.
Now, this takes us back to the pre-retrograde and the pre-eclipse cycle, but it's still noteworthy because this chart for Los Angeles City is from 1781 when it first came together as a place. It wasn't the actual governmental proclamation of the LA city, but it was when it first became more or less a place. And I was really amazed at this chart too, because I had done a chart 8 years ago. There were one of the biggest fires that ever hit California in its history was called the Camp Fire up in Paradise, California, um, near where I was living at the time, but also it just burned it just almost destroyed the whole town. And so we were looking at that time, we were looking at the chart of California, at the chart of the area, and it was so interesting. California's chart, it was shown that California was going to go through like a whole decade of really intense kind of things with it has a I think Uranus and Pluto in late Aries and uh, anyway, there was a lot going on at the time. But what you see in this chart is for this particular chart, we have a moon at 3 Aries, which is on the Venus star point. And we also have, guess what? We have just about a Pluto return. So talk about from ashes to ashes, Pluto
Wow.
returned to the original founding of LA. Uh, this is it. This is what the next couple of years. So it is a major rebuilding. I mean, so much. It wasn't obviously LA is pretty big, but it wasn't the whole city, but it was two or three major components of the city just burned to the ground, and a lot
Yeah.
of reconstruction that will rebirth, death and rebirth going on over this next couple of years with that Pluto return. I
Plus they
also
have
found this
the
chart
Olympics
kind
are
of
coming
ask.
there. Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah. 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 I also found this chart fascinating in that we've got Venus and Neptune conjoined in the 12th house in Libra. And that just seems so Hollywood to me. And so,
Yeah,
um, part of the mystique of LA, uh,
definitely.
Hollywood, and also the 12th house, all the things that go on behind closed doors, behind all the secret relationships, all the, maybe sexual improprieties that have happened over the course of
Hmm.
its history. But Aries now and the Aries star point in these last several years has been opposing the Neptune Venus. And
Hmm.
so the Me Too movement came out, the Harvey Weinstein thing. It was like so many people started um, coming out and uh, facing having to face the consequences of past actions in terms of sexual improprieties or whatever relationship situations that were kind of going on there. The other thing that happened, as you can see, of course, Mars and Pluto were so close to their opposition at that time.
Yeah.
And so it was also right on the angles, right on the midheaven IC and of LA.
Yeah. That's a really good point about the Me Too movement and everything else in as the Venus star point has moved across that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I was also noticing that connected to the early Scorpio degrees, that every time
hmm.
every 4 years when the Venus star point came back to Scorpio from about, I think around 5 degrees Scorpio, and now it's going to be at 1 degree Scorpio, that there was always a sex scandal being exposed during the Scorpio period, and it almost became so predictable for me that every time the Venus star point was going to next go into Scorpio, I thought, okay, who's going to be exposed now? And sure enough, somebody was. And I did an article on this probably a decade ago about this.
Hmm.
And I had done all this research about all the different people who, um, coaches and producers and teachers, and of course, there's always the clergy. There are always the cases with the Catholic Church and things like that. But there was always somebody in power that was being exposed for sexual improprieties during that time. So yeah, so you can see here all the different things that were happening. So LA's in a place of kind of rebirth and reconstruction right now. And one of the things that came out recently about the film industry in LA, you were saying not so many great films are coming out of there these days, which is true, not like the classic era of Hollywood where you had these enormous great movies coming out. Now it's mostly the action, like the Marvel or
Hmm.
animation. I mean, those are still really big, but it but also people aren't really working in Hollywood anymore. They've been farmed out to other states, they've been farmed out to other countries. There's film studios that are uh, all over the place now because of tax breaks, and it's just too expensive to make a film in Hollywood anymore, the cost of living. And so all those people that were living there and working in the support services sector behind the scenes, that were doing everything, from painting the sets to catering to hair styling and you name it, all the different things, jobs that you have to have in the creation of a film. Those people had to find other jobs. The industry has been moving to other for the most part, to other places. So that's another thing. So that may change also
Hmm.
in the new era.
Right.
Now we get to a story that also came in before the retrograde era, but it was Luigi Mangione who becomes a folk hero to the masses of people who are really feeling powerless about the healthcare crisis in America.
Hmm.
And so that was another thing that I wanted to mention in that sixth house, uh, that conglomeration of planets in the sixth house in the U.S. Venus star point chart is about the healthcare and how this is going to likely surface again. But why is it that, people started siding with him, and that, of course, people really feel that way. Some people see him as a victim, some see him as a savior. His natal Venus is at 3 degrees Aries. We don't have the exact birth time for him, but it's going to be, very close to 3 Aries, if not 3 Aries. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't think
And
the time will actually change that, but this is the current Venus star point again.
yeah, plus yeah, Saturn and Aries. I know that during this retrograde, they announced, they're seeking a death penalty, and then his lawyers are now arguing this like double jeopardy thing. So there's a whole thing in court playing out, but it sounds like he's going to be potentially facing the death penalty. One thing I
Right.
thought was really relevant too was I know a lot of people talked about ooh, when he shot the CEO. Mars was right around the time that Mars was stationing retrograde, but it was also right when Neptune stationed direct. And I feel like it was an event that was very strongly connected to Neptune and the Saturn-Neptune cycle, and what we're going to see in the way that, yeah, him becoming like this folk hero, like you're saying, and how it brought out all this anger and outrage people have about healthcare, which, yeah, is a massive, such a huge issue that's not being addressed at all, and by the current administration. And so, yeah, we'll have to see where all that goes. There's definitely it's a sign of a lot of stuff to come, most likely.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, just a side note, he has a Sun Mars conjunction
Mm,
in Venus's sign,
mm,
but still, that's pretty potent energy, Sun
mm-hmm,
and Mars together,
mm-hmm.
combust. Um, Opposite Chiron
Yeah.
and Uranus is kind of square, so there's like a T square here. But I was looking at Chiron too in terms of the whole idea of the health, again, the healthcare system attacking Mars to Chiron.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say. I'm sure the law is going to not be in his favor, but by some miracle, maybe he will not have the death sentence.
Yeah,
Maybe
but
he will.
the widespread support that he drew really is a sign of just how angry people are, and are going to really demand change. And yeah, we'll have to see what happens. This I feel like this summer could potentially be pretty wild with different protests potentially, or we'll see what happens, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I wanted to bring up the US Sibley chart here just for a moment because there's so much going on with this right now.
Mm,
Everything we've just spoken about, all the early Aries energy of Saturn and Neptune, of Mercury and Venus, of the Venus star point. And this is the US Venus, 3 degrees of Cancer. So everything in Aries is basically squaring this. Again, another sign of what have you got? Venus in the seventh house in Cancer. You've got wonderful relationships with people. for the most part. You've also got Mars in the seventh house, so not always wonderful
Yeah.
relationships. You've got a lot of open enemies, but you've also got some great allies, right? So here's the square to that Venus and broken down relationships
Mm,
that have been
yeah.
happening. And the Venus Jupiter has always been a sign in Cancer of our really strong economy, of our wealth and our abundance. And I look at what's coming in the next few years, in the next 4 years, at least during this term of presidency. We've got Saturn. I don't think Neptune will quite get to the sun, but Saturn will get to square the sun.
Oh, yeah. Opposite the sun,
And
it'll be a Saturn opposition transit. Yeah.
uh, yeah, exactly. Opposition to its own place. Yeah, because it's got a Sun Saturn square to begin with, pretty tight. And the all these things are going to go over the Venus and the Jupiter. So yeah, I think these things that are being planned, that's going to be a hurtful period for the US in terms of, alliances and wealth.
Yeah. It's really remarkable that Venus star point being right on the IC. And like you're saying, it's just going to keep getting closer, right?
Yes.
This, and, but this one was, I guess, maybe one of the most exact squares to the Venus. So it does make a lot of sense that, like you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
with the broken
Hmm.
relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you look at the Saturn-Neptune conjunction forming at the IC, you know, in some ways it is about giving birth to a new nation or giving birth to a new set of ideals, a new set of principles, laws, dreams. So what is going to be put into action? But again, with all this Aries energy, we have to go back to the fact that it is governed by Mars, and how is Mars playing a part in all of this,
Hmm.
behind the scenes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, the Saturn Neptune in Aries can be really concerning with what's going. You can think about it in multiple ways in terms of the concerning things going on and real, like I was saying, lawlessness, like the government not even following laws, but just in the fact that Saturn Neptune periods typically have gone on with very widespread popular revolts of the people and rebellions, violent even, and it's usually driven by economic concerns. And then you have the actual government not following the law and I mean, I just think it's a recipe for we'll see what happens. But yeah, I
Disaster.
think, yeah, we'll see what happens. Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see. The the US in some ways has always been protected. Um,
Hmm.
some say, the fixed star Sirius is on the sun of the US, and that could be something that is protecting it in some ways. There are other things here. I think Jupiter and Venus is kind of a strong statement as well, being together, but they're all going through a lot of hits. They're all going to be experiencing a lot of hits in
Yeah.
this next year, couple of years.
Well, yeah, you're right with
So
the down the IC, there's a fundamental Saturn Neptune on the IC plus a Uranus return coming, Pluto return already happening. Like it's just like a fundamental reshaping of who the United States is and its identity.
yeah,
And I think if you're concerned about the United States, yeah, like you're saying with this star point, I mean, it's the time to get active and participate in becoming a leader and whatever you want to see happen. Yeah.
yeah. And of course, there's the nodes we talked about before. Mars
Hmm.
just turned direct. Mars turned retrograde at Leo, and it's just past now. It's just passing that point, clearing its shadow at 6 Leo on the North Node. But again, it's Mars. And so it's Mars giving power and strength to that idea of the king, the monarchy, the not the president, not the not so much the people, but that. But as Pluto creeps closer to the South Node, uh, that the power of the people is going to get stronger as well,
Mm-hmm.
because after all, they um, the people of the U.S., when enough of them are have a good reason, have a good cause, they're not going to shy away from doing what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they are coming together, which probably leads me to the next couple of slides that, oh no, we have Elon first. Um, this is, we don't have to go through all of this,
But yeah,
but
what
there's
people
some
think
pretty,
his chart is close to that sun, like you have here. It is interesting. He has that
it
pot
really is
potentially
because,
serious rising. Yeah.
yeah, Sirius rising, his ascendant Mercury right on the US sun.
Mm-hmm.
His sun is right on the US Jupiter
Mm-hmm.
and Venus. He's done pretty well here until now,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and suddenly, things are reversing. But he's also just had a progressed new moon at 27 Leo,
Oh, wow.
right on Trump's Mars
I
and
had not,
ascendant.
wow, I had not looked at his progression. I haven't looked at his chart much and I had not looked at his progressions. That's amazing. Wow.
Look at all this late Leo, Venus,
Yeah.
Juno, Sun, Moon.
So is that
Yeah.
his progressions like right now?
Yeah.
Wow.
It
So he
was like
just had
May
that new moon.
1st,
Wow.
May 1st.
Mm,
Yeah,
very interesting.
he just had that new moon, just as he was doing his progressed new moon, just as he was taking great power over Doge.
Yeah, and he's got an exalted Mercury by progression, but it's in the retrograde phase going into combustion and I mean doesn't mean things are going to go difficult for him, but necessarily, but with the new moon and that Mercury retrograde and Virgo going into combustion, like it's going to get more
Yeah,
going in this invisible fate, like something, he's going to be, yeah, something's changing. He's got Venus in the underworld by progression also. Yeah, there's something really changing about who he is. Um, yeah.
I feel like things are not going to go well for him
Mm,
on the whole
mm-hmm.
until if they ever do, but they probably will. I think he will come back again. That it might be until the sun leaves Leo and gets into Virgo, and starts to get closer to his moon. And then Mercury retrograde will also be coming closer. That point at which Mercury is retrograde, the midpoint of the Mercury retrograde period is always the cazimi with the
Mm-hmm.
sun. And that's the power point of the retrograde cycle for both Venus and Mercury, and maybe also Mars as well. But in this case, it will be Mercury. Um, the equivalent of the star point for Mercury will be happening here. So I think when he gets back to Virgo, I mean, all this Leo, I just think it's just gone to his head, and all this power, and kind of like
Mm.
taking notes from Trump's playbook on grandiosity and power and
Yeah. I mean, so
all of that.
Regulus, it's pretty powerful. He got Sirius on his ascendant, and then he gets this progressed new moon with Regulus, I gotta say.
Yeah.
I'm curious. when the progressed Mercury was right on his moon. I'll have to look at that later. We don't need to talk about that right now, but I wonder how that lined up with the stuff that was
Yeah,
going on
not
more
that long
recently.
ago, as you
Yeah.
can see. Yeah.
I'm guessing it must
Mm-hmm.
have had something to do with X or something, or and Twitter maybe, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I know when he bought Twitter, Uranus was opposing his natal star point. His natal star point's in Scorpio,
Okay.
right around 17 or 18 Scorpio. Um, yeah, because he's born in 1971, and I think that was about star point was about 17 Scorpio then. And he is and Uranus was opposing it. And remember that back and forth. He was going to buy it and then he wasn't because he didn't think it was valued as much as they said it that it was. And then so he kind of backed out, but then finally the deal went through. But
Right.
that's when he really took over more or less social media and changed it to X, while Uranus, the planet of tech and communications and all that, was basically going over his star point. Yeah.
Wow.
And yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have
Anyway,
to
a
look at
lot
his
more to
chart
say
more.
about him.
Yeah, his chart's
Yeah.
definitely interesting. I'm gonna have to look at that more now. Oh, we can keep going to the next one.
So I've just got a few activists to show here, looping back to our idea of passionate activism. I just found this on social media the other day, and I thought this was so good because I've always used Jane Fonda as a as kind of a role model for social activism. Um, Even though when she was young, she was a social activist, she says, I've led a pretty hedonistic and meaningless life and was unhappy in my younger years. I was very old at 20 and I feel quite young at 87. And she's looking quite good at 87 as well. When I got into protesting, I finally felt connected to something bigger than me. So that's an Aries star point morning star. That's the words of an Aries morning star who, says, hey, there's something more important here than just me.
Hmm.
And Meryl Streep is also an Aries star point, but an evening star. As a multi-award winning actress, she's been using her platform quite continuously at these award shows to call out issues that are facing the country and government decisions that are facing people for the last couple of decades now, I think. So that's another one that, coming from unlikely places. It's not just the politicians or social activists who actually that's what they're doing in life, but these are coming from other fields. Women who are, um, given so much opportunity to uh, have a platform, and they're using it in this particular way.
Hmm.
This we can go through really quickly. Rachel Maddow has been the anchor of MSNBC for quite a while, which is a news anchor, which is a news network. She's also an Aries star point with 20 degrees Aries VSP. But what's interesting now is that the Venus retrograde was right at 10 degrees Aries, right between her natal Venus and her natal Sun. And also notice that the Mars Pluto opposition is affecting her Mars and her angles. And, I heard some talk recently that she may be stepping down from MSNBC or changing positions or taking another role because things are changing. You're going to see things changing in the media as well in terms of, funding has just been taken away from public broadcasting, both
Yeah.
NPR and PBS. And you're going to see this administration using whatever force they have to uh, silence networks and stations that don't agree with their point of view. And MSNBC is classic for not agreeing with, that point of view. So we'll
Right.
see what happens, but I expect something that will still come in the coming months and with her. Well, this Pluto is coming up to her Mars.
Hmm.
Now, I know you have something to say about him too, but Cory Booker, wow, that was impressive. Very impressive. That speech, 25 hours on the House floor. Again, look at his Venus. His natal Venus is 10 Aries, which is the exact retrograde degree of Venus this year. And he's
Right.
also a Venus star point in Aries, born
It's
in
also,
1969.
I'm pretty, his Venus is stationing. I mean, it's retrograde in his chart, but it
Yeah.
was only like a couple, 2 or 3 days after he was born. Venus station direct, so it's got that phasis, traditional astrology, like this really intensified
Mm-hmm.
Venus, and so it's interesting, like the stationing Venus in Aries, just like I'm gonna plant myself right here for 25 hours and speak. And it was also because the timing of it I just found really interesting. He started on March 31st.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just trying to pay attention to what do we see happening with Neptune entering Aries. I mean, this is right after the Aries. There had also
Mm-hmm.
just been a solar eclipse on his Venus like a couple days before this.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, obviously, like you said, Venus stationed there, Mercury stationed there. He's having a nodal return at the same time with everything there. And then, yeah, Neptune comes into Aries. And I mean, the Democratic Party has not been doing well either and has been really ineffectual. And this was really one of the first big things somebody tried to do. I noticed a lot of people seemed even kind of like, I'm not maybe a lot of people, but I feel like I definitely saw some people kind of jaded, like, oh, who care? He's just like a politician. But while it was happening, I put it on to watch it, and it was honestly a very moving. If you actually watch what he was saying, it was very moving. It was very genuine. He was really drawing on sort of forefathers and ancestral lineages, especially in the form of John Lewis, who he had looked up to so much and been mentored by, and who famously came to national attention as a freedom writer. And we had mentioned that in the last one too, that the 1961 Freedom Riders that John Lewis was part of, that was a
Mm-hmm.
previous Venus retrograde in Aries event. And in fact, just like Cory
Yeah.
Booker, it was a Venus stationing direct in Aries event. So I thought that was just really amazing for, John Lewis going on to Freedom Riders with Venus stationing direct in Aries. And then later it comes back around, Cory Booker having Venus stationing direct in Aries in his chart. And,
Yeah,
and,
the 8-year return of the
mhm.
1961 Venus retrograde cycle in Aries, the eight
Yeah,
year,
he's literally like the 8-year return
he's
of that.
born,
Yeah, yeah,
born at that
yeah,
moment. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's really. Do you want me to show the chart I had of his?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. If you want to stop share, I'll. Okay, so this is a chart for Cory Booker. They have this on Astro Data Bank, giving it an A rating from memory. And I haven't really researched the whole history of this exact chart time, and this is also showing it in whole sign. So assuming he is like well, at least Aquarius rising, the whole sign houses would be accurate.
Mm.
So it would put it down, Venus down in the third house, ruling whole sign ninth house and fourth house. And I see he also does have Saturn in Aries, so he's coming into that Saturn return. And as I mentioned,
Yeah.
within 3 days, Venus was stationing direct. So it's got that very extra intensified quality. And so when he began, this is when he began the speech. um, set for DC. Interestingly, even the angles of the chart, the ascendant was, if that's the right time, it was over by his lot of fortune, even, but the descendant would have definitely been right next to his Venus and his Chiron. The sun was going over it. You know, here we see Neptune only 3 minutes into Aries. It had just entered. And we
Mhm.
have Venus and Mercury with the North Node all back, with his North Node. It's just really powerful. Uranus also transiting his Mercury, and down on the bottom of this chart, the moon would have been also just moving through Taurus. So that's really nice to have that for the longevity. um, as he spoke, the moon would have sort of moved across all of this. So
Yeah.
really powerful. And I put up a few quotes. So he said, "Tonight I rise with the intention of getting in some good trouble. I rise with the intention of disrupting the normal business of the United States Senate for as long as I am physically able. I rise tonight because I believe sincerely that our country is in crisis. And I believe that not in a partisan sense, because so many of the people that have been reaching out to my office in pain and fear, having their lives upended, so many of them identify themselves as Republicans. So I feel like that really goes well with like the Venus retrograde and disrupting the normal business and getting in some good trouble. So it's still got that Venus.
Mhm.
Also
Agreed.
thinking his Chiron, he's been having his Chiron return for a while, but it's interesting. His Chiron is, I forgot to mention that it's like right with that Venus star point. This seems very much like a Chiron
Mhm.
moment for somebody to really step into this place. And then later, this is the part where he talks about John Lewis that I wanted to share. It's time to
Mhm.
heed the word of the man I began this whole thing with, John Lewis. I beg folks to take his example of his early days when he made himself determined to show his love for his country at a time the country didn't love him, to love this country so much, to be such a patriot that he endured beatings savagely on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, at lunch counters, on freedom rides. He said he had to do something. He would not normalize a moment like this. He would not just go along with business as usual. He wouldn't know how to solve it, but there's one thing that he would do that I hope we all can do, that I think I did a little bit of tonight. He said for us to go out and cause some good trouble, necessary trouble, to redeem the soul of our nation. I want you to dream or redeem the dream. Let's be bolder in America with a vision that inspires with hope. It starts with the people of the United States of America. That's how this country started. We, the people. Let's get back to the ideals that others are threatening. Let's get back to our founding documents. Those imperfect geniuses had some very special words at the end of the Declaration of Independence, when our founders said we must mutually pledge each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. We need that now from all Americans. This is a moral moment. It's not left or right, it's right or wrong. Let's get in good trouble. And I think to me, with the Venus and Aries, with the Chiron, like this was like a really good, and I myself, I think I shared last time, I have Venus and Aries. This to me was like a really good example of Venus and Aries, because there is this like kind of fighting, like this thing, I'm just gonna take it. Also, even the thing like I'm gonna break the record, but I'm gonna rouse people up, because it's like it's Aries and it's Mars, but it's still Venus, and it's like still trying to bring people together, and it's trying to like inspire people, right? And it's trying to like to light a fire or like spark something. So that's all just, yeah, I thought it was very, very good for that.
What really moved me about the timing of this is that it was the very moment that Neptune went into
Yeah,
Aries.
exactly.
And there
I
was
think so.
something that he said in his speech. If you go back to the speech about let's rekindle hope, let's
Mm-hmm.
get back to the ideals that others are threatening. Let's get back to our ideals. Um, I want you to redeem the dream.
Mm-hmm.
These are all kind of Neptune, and it makes me feel really um, um, hopeful about Neptune going into Aries,
Mm-hmm.
that this kind of thing happened the moment Neptune went into Aries, and that for the 14 years coming up ahead of us, that people are going to feel this way, that they are going to rekindle their dream and their ideals and not just put up for, we kind of alluded to this in the last program we did, or I did I think in any case, I've been feeling this way, was with all these retrogrades and eclipse things going on through Pisces, that that period, this first few months of the year has been, we're all still kind of, people were still kind of asleep and waking up from a nightmare almost, or a bad dream in any case, and not really knowing what to do while it's in Pisces, but just knowing that you're feeling a lot of pain and a lot of hopelessness and a lot of fear and a lot of suffering for maybe not you personally, but what's going on around you and what you see going on. And that when the planets started to get into Aries, I felt like we were going to just you know, like get out of bed from that bad dream or that
Mm-hmm.
nightmare, and we were going to get up and we were going to rouse within ourselves the power and the incentive and the initiative to, to do something, to take
Mm-hmm.
action of some sort.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can go back. You want to go back to your slides then? I think,
Well, I have a few more passionate activists to show, and then I'm pretty much done.
yeah, that's great.
But
We can go and do that.
yeah, we can keep on that theme. Um, so after, yeah, I think this is might be the last one or two that I have.
Yep, that's great.
So this is the list, and I keep adding to it basically, of passionate activists or people with artistic vision and, having a fighting spirit, basically, is what I would say with the Venus star point Aries. These are some of the evening stars, and these are some of the morning stars. And I was just really moved by Bernie and AOC going on tour together. Like, they're like rock stars right now, selling out all these places where they are, where they are. And but is it an unlikely pair? You would think it was at the beginning, but no, their ideas are completely aligned. Their Mercuries are conjunct within 1 degree in early degrees of Libra. So the current Venus star point and all this early Aries energy is, igniting both of their Mercuries. So yeah, they're doing something, and they're speaking to very large crowds, and in general being um, getting a lot of support.
Hmm. And Bernie's also, when we talk about healthcare, he's somebody that actually has put forth plans for healthcare also.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And also, he's a Virgo sun. He's fighting for the working class. He's always been kind of fighting for the working class. Yeah. And of course, AOC is a Libra sun with Libra Mercury. She's fighting for equality, justice, inclusion, diversity, equity, all those things, people's rights, human rights, justice, all of those things. And what else do I have here?
It's interesting too, just while you do that on that last one, Bob Dylan, because when Venus stationed, the film A Complete Unknown did not really win much at the Oscars, but
No, it
they were
didn't. I was
nominated, and
surprised.
Timothy Chalamet had been nominated for playing him, and it was a time period that lined up with him coming back into popular culture again, and he is somebody in the and in that 1961 Venus retrograde, we're talking about the same one that had John Lewis involved with the Freedom Riders, and I think that was a previous one with the cycle, the 32-year cycle of the Mars retrograde in Venus. I think that was one that had the Mars retrograde and Cancer too coming in, but that when Dylan shows up to New York City, that whole opening part of that story, which was also a Jupiter Saturn conjunction, it was also a Venus retrograde in Aries came in during that time. So there's actually,
Yeah.
and that young Dylan, that idealistic Dylan that we really think about and like putting like these idealistic words into poetry and protest songs is yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. He was
His
really brought up
heroes,
again.
Woody Guthrie, his hero.
Mm, right.
The opening sequence of the film, he wanted to get to New York to
Hmm.
visit Woody Guthrie because he that was his hero,
Right.
and he was just a complete unknown when he arrived, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was a little disappointed that the Oscars didn't give that film a little bit more.
Yeah.
Um, because it's a really important piece of American history and um, the whole 60s, the whole movement of the 60s, very much about that. But
Mm,
but the thing I wanted to leave us on was that Neptune is changing signs. It's going into a new sign now for the next 14 years. And I think Neptune ultimately is about the dream, the
mm,
personal dream, but the collective dream as well. And I just think that really, with Neptune coming into Aries, being backed up by all this other stuff coming into Aries, maybe it's time for a new dream.
mm,
So, in this year ahead, until Neptune and Saturn firmly, take hold in Aries and make their conjunction early next year, this is, uh, as we mentioned before, we're in the balsamic phase. The old dream is dying. The old
mm,
dream is pretty much on its way out. But if that dream can't stay alive, what new dream can we conjure up at this moment?
mm.
So that's pretty much what I've got. I don't think I have anything after this. No, the rest is just about me and my
Yeah.
background and where you can find me. But
SophiaVenus.com. Do you have any upcoming events or anything you'd like to promote or announce?
well, I'm afraid to say I'm going to the US next week, but I've got so many people already clamoring for personal sessions or workshop or whatever. So I don't know if I'm gonna have any time for anything at all, but I am going. But next year at Kepler, I'm going to be teaching both classes I taught this year
Oh, great.
for the winter semester, the Venus a Venus Star Master class right around the
Right.
Cazimi in early January, and then the 5 week astromapping class at Kepler that will start in the winter quarter, the second period of the winter quarter. I know you teach at Kepler as
Mm,
well
yeah.
and have classes coming up. So it's nice to be associated with them and to have great students coming through
Yeah.
there.
And your part, yeah, so you're the Venus master class is sort of its own thing. In fact, I've heard from somebody that took your somebody that's on my Patreon in one of our monthly meetings. She was talking about having been in your class and what she learned. It sounded really cool and really valuable. So that's a definitely great one for people to take if they want to get more into this. The astromapping class you teach, so that is part of I believe an astromapping, that's a part of an astromapping certificate. So if people even
Yeah,
want to get an actual certificate in astromapping, that's available from Kepler. So that's definitely something to check out at the Kepler College website. And you were mentioning I've been teaching a zodiacal releasing class for Kepler, and that is part of a new Hellenistic astrology certificate that Kepler has. So there's a new Hellenistic natal astrology certificate, and there's also a new Hellenistic timing technique certificate. And there are classes happening this spring for both of those certificates, as well as the summer and so forth. I might teach the like releasing in the fall, as in terms of when I teach that one again. But if people have been interested in learning Hellenistic astrology, we have a really great faculty that's been put together for that. That most of which have learned from Dimitra George personally. So it's sort of a lot of it's very much in that lineage. And
Mm.
I guess as for
Let me
myself,
tell you,
yeah.
I want to just put a plug in for Gray here to the
Thank
listeners. I had my zodiacal releasing done by Gray recently, and it was always confusing to me before how it all worked, but he put it into such a sensible way to think about it and to use it and to follow it. And I must say, I highly recommend if you haven't had it done, a personal reading done in zodiacal releasing, Gray is your guy because you did a really fantastic job. And
Yeah,
I,
thank
I
you.
still have a few questions I want to ask you about,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
we can do that later. But anyway, I'm sure the class will be great fun too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, actually, we even traded readings, and I got a Venus star point reading from Era, which I think people already know, but in case they need any referral for that as well, like, yeah, that was a really brilliant and definitely, even though I've spent a lot of time tracking the Venus cycle and looking at it
Yeah.
myself, you brought up a bunch of
Yeah.
things about my life and how it connects to the Venus cycle that I hadn't realized and was very illuminating. So yeah, thank you for that.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I
thank
love
you.
I love that with different astrologers when we share our specialties with one another and we can kind of open their eyes to new ways of looking at their chart, which you definitely did for me in the zodiacal release. I'm now looking at certain signs and houses that I was sort of ignoring before.
Yeah, no, totally. It does open that up. Yeah, so opens that up. So if people are interested in that, I'll put a link below. Yeah, I have books open, so you can definitely schedule a zodiacal releasing consultation with me or just anything else you want to talk about. I have some openings now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you.
And I have a little bit of a waiting list on my calendar right now. So, but if you want to inquire about a reading, just email me. There's a form at the website that you can contact me with at sophiavenus.com, and um, I can put you in, link you to my scheduler, and you can book something for sometime this summer.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ariel, for coming back and doing
That
this
was
again with me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was a good run. We had another nice long session together, but I think we got a lot of great things talked about, and well, we'll see what
Yeah, and I guess
when
when I
the
say a
next
lot
one
of fun,
comes.
it's not like the news we were covering was exactly fun, but it's
Yeah,
having the chance to talk about the astrology of it somehow does bring some extra meaning and hopefully,
yeah,
like you're saying, I like the hopeful message you left us with about Neptune and Aries
yeah,
and this really being a time to
yeah.
redeem your dream and all that.
The one thing we didn't say we were going to talk about was the Pope dying, and I think
Yeah.
that tied into the not only the Saturn-Neptune balsamic phase
Hmm.
for the church as a whole, but also in late Pisces, because with Saturn in late Pisces, and that they're just going to elect a new Pope now. Of course, Neptune's in Aries, but we'll see how that goes. They're still in a balsamic phase, but Neptune's in Aries and the new sign. But
Yeah.
the Pisces theme really brought up a lot with that, with Pope Francis and the church, but also prisons and prisoners. And we did talk about that a little bit. So Hopefully next time we get together, we'll have better news to talk about.
Well, he did have focus on the on people in poverty. He did a much better job of that than previous popes, and that was really important.
Yes.
I thought about that a lot with the Venus Saturn in
Yeah.
Pisces, and even taking the name Francis, I thought was really
Yes.
beautiful
Mm,
related to that. And speaking of
yeah.
zodiac releasing, he has Saturn in Pisces, but I looked and he there's a thing called loosing of the bond from the law of fortune was happening for him in Pisces at his death. So there was
Mm.
actually this whole Pisces thing in his zodiac releasing from the lot of fortune that was really activated at his time of passing. Yeah,
Oh,
but
wow.
the whole thing of the Saint Francis prayer and that it's in the giving that we receive, and I think all of that is I've thought a lot about even beyond Pope Francis, just like Saint Francis coming kind of being rekindled in the collective recently, I thought was really powerful for just like change and yeah,
Right.
ideals and
And
things
he
like that.
inspired people from around the world, from different religions.
Hmm.
I've heard Jews and Buddhists and people from all different people who aren't religious at all loved him, loved him
Mm.
as a man, as a human being for what he stood for.
Mm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here, Ariel,
Hey,
and hopefully
thank you.
we'll get a chance to
Till
do
we
this
meet
again some.
again.
Yep. Okay, awesome. Thank you.